For record-keeping purposes, if you wish to make a statement regarding any item on the agenda, please complete the form located at the entrance or at the rear of the council chambers and deposit it with the Planning and Housing Commission Secretary. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Planning and Housing Commission meeting. Commissioner Sherman will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Please note that Commissioner Woody is in attendance tonight via Zoom. Communications from the public. Persons wishing to address the Planning and Housing Commission are requested to state their name for the record. This portion of the agenda is intended for public comment. State law prohibits the Planning and Housing Commission from discussing or taking action on items not listed on the agenda. The Planning and Housing Commission will appreciate your cooperation in keeping your comments brief. Please observe a 3-minute limit to communications. Ms. Capilla, did we receive any speaker cards or written comments from the public for any items not on tonight's agenda?
No, Chair, we did not receive any speaker cards or written comments.
Thank you. To meeting minutes, approval of minutes for the Planning and Housing Commission meeting of April 24th, 2023. Ms. Capilla, did we receive any speaker cards or written comments regarding the April 24th minutes?
No, Chair, we did not.
And do we have a motion from the commission regarding the minutes?
I motion to approve the meeting minutes for the Planning and Housing Commission meeting of April 24th, 2023.
I'll second.
And we have a second from Commissioner Alexander. If we could please vote.
Commissioner Woody, how would you wish to vote?
I vote yes.
Thank you.
And the meeting minutes agenda passes. Moving to public hearings. Public hearings are items that have been publicly advertised for review and consideration by the Planning and Housing Commission. The first public hearing item is for CUP 2021-0004, a conditional use permit application to allow a drive-through and walk-up window coffee shop, Starbucks, within an existing commercial center located at the southeast corner of Green River Road and Dominguez Ranch Road in the neighborhood commercial district of the Sierra de Oro Specific Plan. Applicant is Jessica Steiner of the Bickle Group Architecture. Mr. Torres, our assistant planner, will present this item. Mr. Torres.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thank you. The item before you is back for a CUP approval of a drive-through and walk-up window Starbucks located within an existing commercial center. The subject site is the last vacant pad within the Green River Promenade Commercial Center, which was originally intended to accommodate a restaurant building in 1991. The project was initially reviewed at the February 21st, 2023 Planning and Housing Commission, and then continued to the April 10th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. At the April 10th Planning Commission meeting, the Commission again expressed concerns regarding the original single-lane drive-through design that provided a 14-vehicle stacking capacity. These concerns were based on the potential congestion within the drive aisles and the potential impact to the on-site circulation. The Commission also inquired about preserving the first drive aisle located immediately to the south of the Starbucks pad. This is the revised site plan provided by the applicant. As shown, it provides an 18-vehicle stacking capacity at the drive-through, which is 4 additional vehicles as compared to the original site design. In order to accommodate a dual drive-through design, changes had to be made to the subject site. First, the retention basin that was originally proposed to the east of the building was removed. The applicant is now proposing to use pervious pavement in various locations within the site to manage and treat on-site drainage. The areas highlighted in green are self-retaining, while the areas highlighted in yellow drain to these self-retaining areas. Secondly, 2 parking spaces from the original site plan had to be removed in order to accommodate this dual drive-through entrance. As shown on the parking table, the number of surplus parking spaces decreased from 7 to 5, which would ultimately still comply with the city's parking requirements. The applicant has also evaluated the preservation of the existing parking drive aisle located immediately south of the Starbucks pad, but was determined it would reduce areas available for the drive-through design. Ultimately, this will make it infeasible to provide a longer stacking depth drive aisle and drive-through as requested by the commission. Staff believes that the updated dual lane design addresses most of the commission's concerns and accommodates the operational needs of Starbucks. The dual lane design increases the drive-through stacking capacity by 4 vehicles, 18 in total. The design would have the ability to accommodate all vehicles based on the projected peak hours. The design is capable of supporting vehicles beyond the drive-through entry without impacting the on-site circulation. And the updated design has a minimal reduction in parking, which maintains conformance with the city's parking requirements. Therefore, tonight, the CUP is requesting for your approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. We'll open it up to the commission for any staff-related questions.
I don't have any.
Sac Center, no? Mr. Woody, any staff-related questions?
Yes, actually, I would like to ask Mr. Torres about the process through which the revised plan came about with the applicant, because I know between the first and second reviews, we had a little more time, but didn't get any sort of revised plan, and yet this time we were able to accomplish that. Can you speak about the process that happened?
Yes, Commissioner Woody. So originally, the original site plan and moving towards the meeting on February 21st, the staff was and the applicant were looking at alternative site designs to accommodate and to also address the commission's concerns. As you may know, the applicant did want to move forward with the original site plan as provided before you originally. So with this new design that was provided by the applicant for tonight's approval, the process did go a little bit faster, given that this one design to ideally address all commission's concerns, and it does provide more stacking to the design. So we weren't dealing with more options, or so to say, designs as the previous meeting.
Yeah, Commissioner, if I could just clarify that real quick. So originally, when the applicant submitted their proposal, they had one option that you were aware of. They had not proposed a dual lane, and at that time, they had been in communication with Starbucks, who was not in support of a dual lane. Subsequent to that, when they were asked to come back with revised plans, they did have several options included in their packet. And in the consideration of one of those options, which was the dual lane, they did find that Starbucks would be willing to accept that, a dual lane. And so then there was the issue of determining whether or not it would meet the water retention issues. So that was discussed at our last meeting, and they've since vetted that out, and they are now proposing that as their option.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, both Mr. Torres and Mr. Eastman. And I was also curious then about the water retention, reservoir that was, in the last plan, but now this time it's a different system being employed. Is that correct? And can you just explain a little more about that for me?
Sure. Yes, the original bioretention basin, was to accommodate all drainage at the site. Given that the site design was changed at this time for a dual lane drive-through, design, the site did meet the standards or requirements from our development services department in reference to the sloping, the conditions at the site of a 2-to-1 slope. So there was that option available for the applicant to go to the pervious pavement to accommodate for the dual drive-through lane.
Also, what's different about this is that they're using pervious paving, which is an option that's used in some cases. We actually have it on Bell Street, where City of Hope did it, and it's a slower filtration, and it actually absorbs into the ground versus using a basin capture. So that was a change in the design to allow this. So we're just changing it out from pervious paving.
Okay, thank you. And so am I understanding, because when we're talking about water collection there from the site, we're talking about just sort of the water that either comes from rainfall or from the sprinkler systems, right? It's not water that Starbucks itself is using, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had a better understanding of all that.
Is that it for you, Mr. Woody, on this round?
Yes, no more questions for staff. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move to public comment. I'm going to go ahead and open public comment on this item. Ms. Capilla, I do have 4 cards here. Are there any other cards that have been presented?
No, Chair, just those.
Okay. So these appear to be from the applicant. Let's see, I think Mr. Rich Liebel, start with you. Oh, Mr. Oden. Okay.
Good evening. Yes, thank you,
Doesn't matter the order. So.
Mr. Chair, Honorable Commissioners. Jennifer Oden with Solomon, Saltzman, and Jameson, attorney for the property owners, Green River Coffee Company, which are represented by Rich and Chuck here behind me. And first, let me say thank you again to staff. It has been a pleasure working with staff. They've been professional, responsive, and really just very easy to work with. And I want to thank the Commission again for considering this item. I know this is the 3rd time, so I'll say in my head, 3rd time's a charm for the Commission. But if I don't want to belabor staff's report, I know everybody's familiar with the project at this point. I just did want to highlight a couple items that the applicant has really worked with staff, worked with the Starbucks team as well, because keep in mind, again, the applicant is the property owner here. Starbucks is the intended use, i.e. a tenant at the location. So has worked with both planning staff, has worked with other departments within the city of Corona, and has certainly heard the comments, concerns, and questions from the commission to get to this point. And when I said last meeting, the April 10th meeting, I think we're close. I think we can get there. I'm hoping we've got there at this point in time. So to address some of those questions and concerns, a big one, as we all recall, was the drive-through, right? And the capacity of the drive-through, the stacking within the drive-through. Grand Terrace was given as an example to emulate. We're fortunate enough, the architects involved in this project are also very intimately familiar with Grand Terrace and helped design that project. We're happy to say that we're at 18 in the queue now for the car stacking in the drive-through. One better than Grand Terrace, they're at 17. It is a dual lane entry now instead of the single entry for the queue. And from the parking analysis and study and drive-through queues, that's showing that we're at the 95%. The demand here for anything in the drive-through will be well served, if not overserved, right, by having an 18-car stacking. So that was maybe first and foremost the actual drive-through site design, which I think we've gotten to a great point and place with the commissioner's comments and questions to redevelop that. And to answer Commissioner Woody's question, how we've gotten there, there have been certain changes, right? The infiltration system was changed to accommodate that. There's been back and forth with Starbucks to accommodate that and what they would be willing to do as a tenant at the location. There's been a redesign from the civil engineering aspect with the infiltration to get to this point. So lots of alternatives have been examined, and here we are presenting the revised site plan with the 18-car queue. The other concern that came up or question was parking. Is parking adequate within the center to accommodate the Starbucks and the demand? As staff mentioned and as detailed in the staff report, per code, the parking that the Starbucks will require is 3 parking spots. 5, in fact, will be provided. So, excuse me, 8. We're in excess of 5. 8 parking spaces will be provided by the Starbucks in excess of 5. A total of 452 parking spaces within the center are required. 459 will be provided. We're in excess of 7. Additionally, the applicant had conducted parking demand analysis and studies, one back in October of 2021 and one very recent in response to the Commission's concerns just after the April 10th meeting in April of this year to address parking within the center during peak hours. And we're finding based on those studies that in October of 2021, 49% of the center was utilized for parking during the weekday peak demand hours. 47% during the weekend peak demand hours, and just recently, those numbers have not quite changed in April of this year, 55% utilized during the weekday demand, peak parking demand, and 52% during the weekend. Additionally, the owner of the parking center, of the shopping center, has the ability under the leases, and I think this came up in the last meeting as well, where employees of the existing shopping center are supposed to park, potentially if parking is ever an issue, because as you recall, there are parking spaces to the rear of the shopping center, and the owner reserves the rights within each lease for the rules and regulations within that shopping center to require employees to park in the rear if it ever becomes necessary. To date, we're informed it's never been a problem or become necessary, but that option is there. The other main item that was touched upon and that the applicant's been responsive to the commission is the removal of the first drive aisle entrance and looking into that to see how that could be accomplished without potentially that removal of that drive aisle entrance. Of course, as staff mentioned, the removal of that first drive aisle is necessary to get to the 18-car stacking queue for the drive-through, and it provides the safest and cleanest or clearest method of travel for all people or vehicular traffic within the center. We're also further informed that from the property owner of the shopping center that that first aisle drive entrance, regardless of the proposed development of Starbucks, has been a concern for cut-through traffic, because what can happen is vehicular traffic cuts through that first drive aisle in an effort to avoid the speed bumps that are on the main drive aisle. So from a traffic engineer perspective, again, which has been provided to the city, vetted with the city's traffic engineer, and looked at the safest, clearest path of travel for vehicular traffic would be to keep the main drive aisle where the speed bumps exist and allow this 18-car stacking for the drive-through. And maybe lastly, I think the commission is aware, but there's been a great level of support for the project. There's been phone calls into staff, emails into staff, signed petitions to staff in support of the project. At the last meeting, we were fortunate enough to have a couple people from the center, the office park, and even the commercial center here in support of the project. That hasn't changed. We're still getting the support for a lot of residents, workers, visitors to the area, that this would be a great project and ultimate development for the city of Corona. So with that said, based on what we've had before the commission in these 2-3 meetings, I think that you now have before you a site plan that certainly is compliant with the City of Corona Municipal Code. I think it serves well under the Sierra del Oro specific plan. This location is zoned as neighborhood commercial district, does allow for a drive-through with a conditional use permit. There's 70, 75 plus conditions, I think, as proposed by staff on the conditional use permit that gives the city control, right, to make sure that the project is built and that everything happens as conditioned on this conditional use permit. So with that, we would be available for any questions, and we'd respectfully request the commission's approval of the CUP. Thank you.
Thank you. Did the other cards, did you want to present, or you're covered by Ms. Oden?
Just want to thank everyone, thank staff and the commission for having us tonight. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's really not. I think the changes are definitely positive, and it goes along the line with what you guys usually try to do, is push things towards being as good as they can be. You know, it's interesting. I'm curious that the 55% number. I'm assuming that doesn't count, or that includes the parking that nobody in the center will use. That it's in the back. It's a shame that nobody could or would use it. I kind of wonder functionally, I'm sure this will probably work, so I'm going to leave the decision in your hands. I'm not going to try to sway you one way or another. I'm just sort of making an editorial comment. That it seems like wasted space. It seems like, I wonder what 55%, including the back, looks like functionally to somebody coming into the front of this place. We've sort of been dancing around the fact that this place seems to be underparked by 25 or 30% functionally, even though the numbers bear out. Yeah, we got 400 spaces, but we have 150 that nobody will ever use. So, and there was ample talk about that last time. So, the center's very nice. Lots of good businesses. I worry about it messing it up. I'm sure that this new plan will help keep from messing it up as bad as it would have been had the first plan come to fruition. So, like I said, I just want to thank you, thank the applicants. So I know there's probably been a Manhattan Project type effort to get it back here as fast as they did. So, it is what it is. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to the commission for any final remarks or motion.
I just want to say thank you for getting this done so quickly. I know what goes into these kind of cases, so it is a lot of work, and you guys have really taken the time to look at all the comments that were given and address them, so thank you.
Ms. Alexander, go ahead.
Yes, thanks to the applicant. I was pleased to see the revision, and if I couldn't have my first choice, it's no Starbucks up there, but across the street, then this, I think, is the best. I think you've checked most of the boxes, and I appreciate the effort that went into it. I did have a question as far as the no indoor, obviously, because there's just no space, but for the outside seating, if that was to be down the road, how is that preventable?
It's preventable. Thank you, Commissioner Alexander. It's preventable. It's actually a condition in the conditional use permit right now, if approved by the commission, that there shall be no interior or exterior seating. And if there ever were to be, that the applicant would have to come back before the commission to modify that condition. So our intent at this point in time, what's been presented is no interior, of course, and no exterior. And the conditional use permit itself allows for the city to have that control to show this is not within the purview of the approval. And if it ever were to be desired, we, the city, gets to hear about it again.
Thank you. I had gone through the 6 pages, and it just escaped me of where it was, so thank you. I know it's in the staff report in the write-up. That's all I have.
Yeah, thank you both to staff and the applicant. Sometimes it is difficult. You mentioned third time's a charm. But I would have to say, any project, there's always room for review and sometimes creative replanning and how a project can be approved. And I think this is an example of sometimes where it takes multiple times to get to a point to where I think from my standpoint, we have a plan that at least meets the best objectives. I'm going to go back to an earlier comment of perfection was brought in some part, and I think this gets closer to where it can be. I know that it's difficult for the applicant to go through the additional time and often expense to get to this point, but in the end of the day, this is a business that should be approved, would operate for several decades, and it's important that we ensure that it can operate well within the city. Those would be my comments. Mr. Woody, any comments that you have?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my comments are going to be a little bit along the line of the process. I know we're all here reviewing this for the third time, and probably none of us wanted that to be the case at the beginning. Not those of us on the commission, not staff, and certainly not the applicant. But that's where we are. I think the lessons to come away from that is, when we had the first meeting, and we as the commission were pretty clear with our concerns, and gave advice, gave possibilities, gave things for the applicant to consider. I think what happened was the applicant chose an approach of discounting what the commission said, and instead, because within the week right after the meeting, we received emails, multiple emails from the shopping center management, basically telling us that we were wrong, that we should have listened, we should have approved it, staff had done the review, and that we were wrong, and that's really just didn't make a lot of sense in the first place, because we had a duty to give it a full and diligent review, and that's what we did. And I think had the applicant listened to us then, or maybe even if city staff had pushed the applicant in that direction and reminded them the commission gave you very clear advice, very had very clear concerns, and unless you want to address that and fix it, you should not expect a different outcome. And so I would like, that would be my recommendation to staff in the future, is to, if a situation like this were to come up again, pardon me just a moment, that if a situation like this were to come up again, then that would be the path that staff would take. Otherwise, I do think that this current plan we have is a much improved plan, and it definitely puts me, it resolved the major concerns I had from the very beginning.
And that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Chair, if
Ms.
I could jump in
Alexander?
there.
Yeah, you had a comment?
Yes, Commissioner Woody, I'm a little bit at odds with your statement in that I thought that the staff did steer them in the right direction, in that each of the responses did come back with a different option. It wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, as to where I wanted it to get to. But I think the drastic change from this site plan, which is successful and it checks 99% of the boxes, and I believe that would be because staff knows who we are as a commission, knows our past history, and knows our dynamics, if you will, and our pet peeves. And because of that, I believe that's why we are here today. So thank you.
I do want to respond to that if I may, because I understand that this process is sometimes difficult to understand, but first and foremost, staff will never deny an applicant due process. If an applicant comes in and pays for an application and it meets the criteria and they would like to move forward based on whatever staff's recommendation is, we are obligated under the law to do that. And that's exactly what we did with Starbucks every time they came in with their revised proposal. Starbucks heard everyone loud and clear, as well as staff. But from the get-go, staff did bring you a project that did comply with all the objective criteria. They heard the feedback. So this is part of the democratic process. It took 3 times, but I certainly don't want the takeaway to be that anybody really erred on this. We went through the process, we brought it back. But I really do think it is not appropriate to say that staff did not push harder. We push as hard as we can, but once again, we will not deny an applicant due process, which they are allowed under the law, and that's exactly what we have done. So thank you.
And I'll just say I'm sorry if my comment before came across as pointing fingers at staff. I just would like the applicants to be more responsive to the commission in the future.
All right, do we have a motion for this item from the commission?
I'll go ahead and make a motion of approval for the CUP.
I'll second.
All right, and we have a second by Commissioner Sherman. Please vote. And the motion passes. Thank you.
Very much. Much appreciated.
Next public item, number 3, is a TTM, tentative track map, application number 36864, a tentative track map application to subdivide 2.09 acres into 6 lots for single-family residential purposes and 2 lettered lots for street dedication and water quality basin purposes, located on the south side of Corona Avenue and west of Interstate 15 in the R1-7.2 zone, single-family residential, 7,200 square foot minimum lot size. Applicant for that item is Fatih Manasara. The applicant and staff are recommending that this item be continued to our May 22nd meeting. As such, do we have a motion from the commission for that continuance?
A motion to continue item TTM 36864 to the May 22nd meeting.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a second by Commissioner Woody. If you please vote on that continuance. And the motion to continue proceeds. Our next public item is ETA 2023-0002, amendment to Title 17 of the Corona Municipal Code to amend the permitted land uses in the commercial zones listed in Chapter 17.33 and Chapter 17.35 to allow residential land uses pursuant to Senate Bill 6 and Assembly Bill 2011. The applicant for this item is City of Corona. This item, along with our next item on the agenda, which is SPA 2023-002, are for the same topic. For the benefit of time, the commission will ask for a staff report on the topic as a whole, including both the zone text amendment and the specific plan amendments. After the staff report, the commission will then open the zoning text amendment request for public comment and decision from the commission, and then we'll proceed to the specific plan, open public comment, and comment by the commission. So with that, Ms. Joanne Coletta, our Director of Planning and Development, will provide us a staff report on the two items, ETA and SPA.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction. So it's no surprise I'm once again here before you with some housing legislation that has been passed through the state. And of course, being the City of Corona, we are responsible for, adhering to the law and making sure we can implement it in the right way as much as possible. So as the chair indicated, we do have some code amendments here tonight before you. One is to our municipal code, which would be our zoning code, and the other would be to various specific plan amendments. And essentially, they're both doing the same thing. We need to address California legislation under Senate Bill 6 and Assembly Bill 2011, which has to do with new housing law. So really quickly, I just want to tell you what it is. Senate Bill 6 is known as the Middle Class Housing Act of 2022, and Assembly Bill 2011 is known as the Affordable Housing and High Roads Job Act of 2022. Both of these bills occurred at the same time. So the governor signed both bills in September, and they go into effect on July 1, which is in the next couple of months, and they are actually stay into effect right now until 2033. I do want the commission to know that when both of these bills were going through the process, the City of Corona did submit letters of opposition to state legislatures. However, opposition from any local jurisdiction did not resonate with the legislatures, and the governor went ahead and signed these bills anyway. So now we're just doing our best to try to implement them. In your staff report, you did see a comparison of both bills. There are some subtle differences. However, I will go over those verbally this evening, so in case you want to have discussion. So when it comes to both bills, they will allow multifamily housing on property that is zoned to allow office, retail, and parking. And they do not need to change the zone or the general plan amendment to get that. So if you have a piece of property in the city that's zone C3, and the general plan is general commercial, we now have to entertain a housing development project under these two bills if they meet the criteria, and they do not require any zone change. So right there, it tells you that legislation has taken away some of our zoning laws in that respect. Senate Bill 6 does not require any affordable housing component, which is opposite of AB 2011, which does require affordable housing. Housing developments under SB 6 can include residential only. It can also include mixed use as long as 50% or more of the floor area is devoted to a residential component. Under AB 2011, you can do 100% affordable housing, or you can do mixed income housing, which is inclusionary housing, which means it can be mixed with market rate units as well as affordability units. And there is a criteria that they need to meet in terms of percentages. So if you have a mixed income housing, rental housing requires at least 8% and 5% of the units to be extremely low and low and extremely low respectively. And if it's owner occupied, it is required to have 30% of the units at moderate income and 15% for low income. In both situations, the property is about 20 acres or less. However, under AB 2011, mixed income is where the 20 acres or less is applied. And at least 30 dwelling units to the acre is the minimum density that needs to be established in the City of Corona. We are part of a metropolitan statistical area where we have a population of over 2 million, and therefore our fallback in terms of high density is no less than 30 dwelling units to the acre, and that is what is being applied to these bills. The city is allowed to operate on its objective zoning standards when it comes to applying this law. And basically, we have to apply the zoning standard that's applicable to the 30 dwelling units to the acre. So in this case, that would be our traditional R3 zoning, which is our multifamily zoning, and it allows up to 36 dwelling units to the acre. So that would be the fallback zone. Under AB 2011, it's the same scenario. However, when you're dealing with a mixed income project, the bill does have a separate set of objective standards when it comes to additional densities, as well as lot size and setbacks. The site cannot be adjacent to a site where 1/3 of the square footage is adjacent to industrial. Normally, you do have commercial zones that may transition adjacent to industrial, but you also have commercial zones that are adjacent to residential. So we have to make sure in terms of location that they are not adjacent to a site where 1/3 of the square footage is devoted to industrial. The difference in these bills is that AB 2011, the property cannot be within 500 feet of a freeway. 75% of the perimeter of the site must adjoin urban uses, which means it must be developed with some kind of uses other than industrial. And the property does need to be deed restricted to maintain the affordable housing units. So rental units is for a period of 55 years and owner occupied is a period of 45 years. And that bill does allow for ministerial streamlined review because it has that affordable housing component, which seems to always fall back on Senate Bill 35 that was passed a couple of years ago. And in both of these bills, which is unique, which is not in a lot of other legislation, it does require skilled and trained workforce, which is basically prevailing wage. So if anybody wants to come in and use these bills, they are going to have to pay prevailing wage. I don't know if that in itself would be a deterrent, but that is the requirement, and those are the options that a developer would need to weigh when looking at this. I do want to touch on parking requirements. There was also an assembly bill that was passed in January 1st of this year, and it's AB 2097. And what this bill does, it basically prohibits the city from imposing minimum parking requirements on residential, commercial, and other development projects if the project is located within a half mile of a major transit stop. And a major transit stop, based on the law, is defined as an existing bus rapid transit station as well as rapid rail, such as Metrolink. And also the definition is the intersection of two or more major bus routes with a frequency service interval of 15 minutes or less during morning and afternoon commute peak periods. So anybody coming into the city wanting to exercise AB 2011, we would have to look at our transit routes and see if they would qualify under the letter of this law. When it comes to Senate Bill 6 and AB 2011 under the affordable housing component only, it does not limit the city from imposing its parking requirements, but it does require the project to adhere to our requirements, or it can fall back on AB 2097. The big difference here, however, comes into play with the mixed income housing under AB 2011. It basically says no parking is required, regardless of what the law says. But the project still needs to provide bicycle parking and electric vehicle supply equipment, which are charging stations, and ADA compliant parking spaces. So that is the difference in these bills. So something to be aware of if we ever get one of these projects and how the staff would need to evaluate this. So what we are asking to do is that we are asking to amend the codes. And basically what we would be doing is that we would be clarifying in these commercial zones that residential would be permitted based on the law. However, under SB 6, we would be requiring that any housing development that is being pursued under the law would also have to comply with the city's affordable housing overlay zone. And if you recall, we adopted that zoning when we did our housing element update to require at least 20% of total units within a project to have set-aside units for low income. We feel that that is the best way to still have mixed income housing under Senate Bill 6, which has no affordability housing component. For us, it's really in terms of equality. We've already rezoned properties in the city, and if you recall, we removed some sites during the housing element rezoning program, and I still have a shortfall that I have to make up for. And it's only fair that everybody have to pitch into this. So by leaving SB 6 open to the way it is, it brings in competing interests, and it actually will hurt ourselves in terms of having enough sites available for affordable housing. And SB 6 does not prevent the city from doing inclusionary housing. We actually can do that. So our way of doing that is to apply the affordable housing overlay zone on those properties as well. So it kind of makes SB 6 and AB 2011 kind of similar in instances because they would both have an affordable housing component. This would be the language that we would add to the plan. All of the uses would show residential permitted, and then these footnotes would be added, indicating that they would have to comply with the California Government Code. And then also for SB 6, the requirement set forth in Chapter 1731, which is our affordable housing overlay zone. We did discuss this with the City Council in April at a study session, wanting to get their support in terms of amending the municipal code because it is an ordinance that will require adoption by the City Council. They did support staff's direction on that. So we are now here before the Planning Commission in May. You give recommendation to the City Council, and if all goes well, we'll be presenting the first reading of the ordinance and the second reading of the ordinance to the council in June, and we will have it go into effect in July once this bill goes into effect. So that's really how we're proposing to address it. So our recommendation is to approve both the ZTA and the SPA. And you could see there was a slew of findings in the SPA because we are amending 15 documents. It was rather large, but we are recommending approval, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Coletta. It's always fascinating to work our way around the new laws coming from the state. So starting off, well, I think general questions of the commission to staff. Start with that. I'll start. Question, since both of them on the acreage, if a site is greater than 20 acres, then both of these laws do not apply, or what happens in that case?
Yeah, so the fallback is that it's 20 acres or less. So they are trying to really isolate into where this bill would apply. So if somebody came in and wanted to do 30 acres, they could not use this legislation. They would fall back on what the city's requirements are. So whether the property would have to be rezoned or if it's already zoned affordable housing overlay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And kind of along those same lines, so the applicant has the option to pick one law or another to align with. So so one can supersede another of whatever best fits their needs of that development. Is that kind of how it is? They can't pick different components of it. So it's got to be the Senate bill or the AB.
Yes.
And everything that goes with that.
Yes. So when anyone submits an application, they have to tell the city what it is they are exactly applying for. Mm-hmm. We cannot tell them. We cannot guess for them. They have to say, we are doing a housing development project under such and such. So whether it's SB 35, whether it's going to be SB 6 or AB 2011, they have to tell us that because that is going to be the checklist that we are going to use for that project moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions, Ms. Coletta. So when Metro at Maine went in, and Dos Lagos also had an example of mixed use, which was kind of new to the city as far as examples for that model. And so what this is going to do is allow housing within an office or commercial setting. So it's clearing the path for more of Metro and the example in Dos Lagos, correct? So you'll live where you work and shop?
Yes, absolutely. It could be commercial on the ground floor with housing units above, or even in a horizontal layout. Mm-hmm.
So for AB 2011, I was curious, where does the high roads thing come in the title?
The High Rose Job Act, I think it was due to the prevailing wage requirement. I think it's truly about giving workers, labor workers, these labor unions jobs. That's exactly where it's coming from.
High road jobs. Okay, I'm thinking roadways. but-
No,
okay, got it.
no. We have actually, during our housing element rezoning, we heard from a couple of those labor unions. I don't think they showed up here, but they showed up at council supporting it because they know that this will spur construction for them.
Okay. And my first thought after reading both of the staff reports was, man, you thought you had a hard time hiring now. I mean, you have to have a PhD to get through this checklist. It's crazy. If this, then this, and just crazy. So going through that list that you had, you answered one of my questions already regarding the 50% or more square foot designated and no lodging like a hotel. So that's only for the mixed use.
Yes.
Okay. And as far as the rental housing where it's 8%, 5%, and then underneath that where it talks about owner occupied, why is it different? I'm just curious. I just don't understand that for owner occupied. What would be the reasoning?
I think they're looking at, for moderate income, it's a higher percentage, is the missing middle. So you have a likelihood of wanting to provide home ownership to moderate income, and also feeling the financing gap is going to be a little bit less. When you're doing the financing gap on low income, that's going to be a little bit larger. So normally you see home ownership in the moderate income category and not so much in the low income category. But I think what legislation is trying to do is to get people in that direction to actually have the ability to own a home.
I see. And regarding the residential density where it talks about 30 dwelling units for AB2 2011, and it says it's less than 1 acre. When we see it on paper, it's one thing for a definition, but could you give a guess of what percentages of the possible sites that we have that could be impacted by this would be less than 1 acre? Is it a majority of them?
Well, you have a lot of properties on 6th Street. You have some commercial centers in South Corona. A lot of those are less than 20 acres. Unless you do lot consolidation is the only way that you're going to get larger lots. But usually commercial centers, viable commercial centers, are no greater than 10 to 15 acres. When you look at a neighborhood shopping center like in South Corona, Foothill and Main is a good example. That entire area is 15 acres, but only 10 acres was developed with the supermarket, the drive-through restaurants, and then that 5 acres next to Corona Heritage Park has remained vacant for years because the viability of actually pushing it to 15 acres has been very difficult. So normally you see neighborhood shopping centers at 10 to 15. Regional centers like McKinley and Dos Lagos, or the Crossings, are different. They are drawing an attraction from those that live outside of the city to come in and shop. So that's why those centers are generally about 80 acres or greater.
Oh, I see. Okay, interesting. And regarding the, when it goes, and it talks about the city zone standards, applicable residential density shall apply. When you talk about other objective development standards under the bill would apply, is that ours or it's theirs?
It's theirs. So if we had a setback, say someone's doing the mixed income and under AB 2011, and we have a setback, which we do in the affordable housing overlay zone, of 5 feet, this law actually allows them to go 0 if they want to.
I see. Okay, I appreciate that. And when it talks about property should not be within 500 feet of a freeway, I think it's interesting that in one aspect, our high transit area is 9115. So I thought it was odd that it adds that buffer.
It does, and that's because AB 2011 is the affordable housing one, and affordable housing focuses on affirming fair housing and trying to get people into high resource areas. And normally when you're next to freeways, those are lower resource areas because of air pollution. So I think in this bill, they were trying to make sure that it would push development to higher resources areas away from the freeway. But in general market rate residential would be allowed within 500 feet.
That makes sense. So to have projects coming through SB 6 and 2011 for staff to go through that, it's strictly it's a maze. I mean, if you qualify here, then it goes this way. If not, then it goes this way, depending
Yes.
on what the project they're bringing forward, as you stated. And you also talked about the metropolitan statistical area. Is that a definable area? What's
Yes.
included in that?
So the state's already determined the county has MSAs. We are in Riverside San Bernardino's MSA. And so there is a boundary, and the population in that area is just over 4 million. So it truly exceed the 2 million population threshold in that regard. So you have MSAs all throughout the state of California. We just happen to be, ours is the Riverside San Bernardino County Metropolitan Statistical Area.
Thank you. And I had one more page with comments on it. In the staff analysis, and it talks about the HO zone requirement on commercial sites, and what can you project what type of impact this would be for businesses where they're going to have potential of residential high density right next to them or adjacent to them? How is that? Is there any thought to that, or?
No, I think it's, I don't think it's going to impact so much commercial because commercial really thrives on rooftops, especially if it's retail or food related, because it means that if more people are living in the area, it's more likely for them to use those resources versus office uses. So I don't foresee it being so much of an impact, especially if you have that retail component that this housing would be next to. It's why mixed use is such a concept now, but it's nothing different than the way historic downtowns used to be back in the day. If you remember, people lived above stores, and it's kind of like bringing that kind of mentality back, where you just come on downstairs and walk the street and you have access to, retailers. So I don't foresee that. I think it's going to be any kind of transition from a lower density neighborhood, and then all of a sudden you're going to have high density. So we try to buffer that. We have a lot of R3 next to our commercial zones. Probably in South Corona, you have more single family, but yeah, that's definitely going to be the transition that that we'll see.
Thank you.
Let me just get some clarification here. They're saying skilled and trained labor, prevailing wages, but that's not. It's union, correct?
I think there is some labor unions in there, yes.
Yeah, which is just.
I'm
just
not savvy in prevailing wage. Anytime it comes out, I ask the city attorney, you're going to have to explain that.
crazy to me because it drives up the whole construction costs. and
Absolutely,
so-
it does.
For affordable housing.
Exactly, it does. It absolutely. So I think people are going to want to use our properties that are already zoned affordable housing overlay because they're like, the city's already done everything and we have the checklist, the ministerial process, so we have gone through that exercise, yes.
I have a few questions. First, a very informative staff report. Thank you for that. And so far, all the other questions you've answered very, very useful. So I wanted to ask then, you mentioned that one of the provisions of one or the other, it required such developments to be a certain distance from industrial areas. I mean, I know Ms. Alexander asked about freeways, but there's also a separate provision for industrial.
Yes, it cannot be a site that's adjacent to a site where 1/3 of the square footage is dedicated to industrial. So if you have a commercial property and right behind it, there is an industrial building, so that would probably cancel it out.
So like maybe some of the properties along Lincoln, in that Lincoln kind of Smith area would, yeah.
Yep.
Right, okay. And then the 20 acre limit that we discussed a little bit already. So essentially what that does, having that limit, is it would sort of not let larger developments, kind of get around, the planning process, right? They would still have to come to us for zoning changes and
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the smaller lot size, when we did the housing element rezoning, we had stakeholder meetings, and our affordable housing developers told us they generally don't like to go, it's 5 acres is what they play with. So that's why you see projects that are generally 3 to 5 acres, maybe 7 acres, because for them, that's the volume and capacity they could deal with at a single time. They cannot deal with it with a larger project just based on the financing.
Sure. That's what I've learned as well. And then the 30 dwelling units per acre density, what is that comparable to as far as, what we have in Corona?
That's going to be a lot of our traditional R3 zoning. So what you see off of McKinley near the Costco Center, all of those developments are probably about 28, 30 dwelling units to the acre. So that's a norm. 30 dwelling units to the acre is the norm in the R3 industry. However, with all of this legislation, they are really pushing the limit. They are really going super high. So what you're seeing is more of a higher density urban type of development.
And so when you say that R3, you're talking about like mid-rise apartment?
Yeah, you're talking about what you see out there today is like our 3-story apartments, 2 and 3 stories.
And then the other provision that was interesting and which was not related to this was the AB 2097 with the transit. So do you know, have you or staff looked into, if any transit locations in Corona would qualify?
Yeah, we're looking into it on 6th Street to verify, just because we have the RTA bus route, but Metrolink for sure would qualify, so we know North Main is going to get hit. If someone ever decides to redevelopment, they would qualify, but we are looking into the bus routes on 6th Street when we get that.
So the train stations for sure, but then the bus, you're not certain yet about that. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you so much.
So, thank you. It brought to mind a scenario that, in my mind, what the future could behold. So if we do have an industrial area, if there was a future applicant, landlord, that wished to redevelop an industrial zone and potentially convert it to like commercial, they could do that, and which then in turn could become housing at some point. Is that kind of how that could play out?
I need you to say that again.
Well, so if you had an industrial zone which wouldn't qualify for these housing laws, conceivably, if there was an application brought before the city and the commission to rezone an industrial zone into a commercial zone or a light industrial, then that could then qualify for housing.
Yes, if they were to rezone to a commercial and it met all of the other criteria based on its surrounding and lot size, yeah, it could potentially open up that door.
Yeah, so like the west, you mentioned North Main at Metro, but what came to mind was the West Metro area. That's all industrial today,
Yes.
but over time, it's conceivable that could evolve as well.
It could. I could tell you that Corona has a very strong industrial base. That is one thing that we do thrive on, being a good industrial base and manufacturer base based on the design of those buildings. So we don't have a very high vacancy rate. So that's very successful. I can't see really that going away. But I think if you have some office areas that have been struggling, with the change from 2020 and now, there may be some repurposing. They may start evaluating repurposing that office building to housing.
One last question would be, what is next before us? So we've got these 2 recent laws within the last year. We have literally in the last 5 years, multiple laws. Is there something next on the horizon that is going to be layered on top of this that then just augments this reality?
Stand by to stand by.
Yeah, there's always something right
Well,
now.
like,
Yeah, there's a bunch
dramatic
of,
in a way like these are.
not like this. There's a bunch of bills that are going through right now through committee appropriations. Some are extending the term of the bill, like SB 35 is supposed to expire in a couple of years, and now They're wanting to expand it, I think, in perpetuity, so there would be no deadline on it. It's quite overwhelming when we as staff get them and reviewing them. All you could do is do a first blush and then wait to see what is actually going to pass committee and focus on that. So right now, the heavy ones relating to zoning have happened in the last couple of years. And this is really what you're seeing from that. I have not seen anything yet to where we're going to see more of that play out. This is probably the bulk of it, but I've learned never to say never. It is amazing how much the state is so focused on housing. It's overwhelming.
Well, I think we all have an opinion. I have a strong opinion about how the state is coming in and rewriting our general plan, specific plans, and this is just one example.
Yep.
And, you know, we talk about as a city, as residents, and, you know, a sense of place, and Corona's gone overboard with trying to develop that and brand our own, and it makes it very difficult when the state is putting their heavy hand on it and changing. I mean, you may as well open up your general plan and specific plan and let Sacramento rewrite, you know, get their eraser and rewrite everything, and I'm not a fan. However, that said, and I'm trying to understand, for example, in the Circle, and we have, you know, shopping centers, and I don't pretend to know the status of their strength of their business, but if you were to have one and it's within the Circle and it's within a district, I know it's under discussion for a district. It's not presently a district, historic district. So doesn't a historic district trump the ability for high density, that building standard, that object standards that we talk about and that we have discussed and voted on to recommend to council in the past? Doesn't that prevent any of this within, how does that work?
So you are allowed to apply the city's objective development standards and design guidelines. The bill does not take that away. Only if certain aspects of the bill say you have to use this standard instead of the one you have. But in no way does it change the design guidelines, which is a lot for a historic district, because you are going to have specific design guidelines on what the structure should look like, what the architectural characteristic should be. This bill does not take that away. There are some provisions under mixed income, however, that it is going to dictate some of the setbacks, allowing it to be a little bit more flexible by going down to 0 if somebody needs to do that in a particular case, as opposed to what the city's requirement is, which is either 5 feet or 8 feet.
So I think about that, and I think about the impact, and we've in the past have been heavy on the parking, and when that goes away. So what the reality of that is you've got a build coming in where these are older streets, very narrow streets. I mean, look, we just had one for one lot, to subdivide one lot, and the parking issues that came up and for that. So, and much like the lab concerns I might have for that would be, you've got residences just east of there, and that parking overflow. And so all those things for these residents who are living there, and they don't have enough parking as it is. So I think it's more than the individual architectural. It's the whole older communities within the Circle, which is such a negative effect for these residents.
Absolutely. And this is something that is very painful, even for us on the professional side. But the only thing that we can hope for is that when you have a tenant that is interested in leasing a place, and if they are dependent upon their automobile, they're likely going to want to rent in a place that has parking set aside for them. So the hope is that it's going to be driven by demand of potential tenants as opposed to just what the law says. I don't know why somebody would want to live in a place that would be of an inconvenience, but it's one of those things that we may come across it at some point. It's a hard pill to swallow. We don't agree with it. So, yeah, those are all the things that we talk about and we think about. It's been very trying for us as professionals to have to watch these rules be taken away from us, which is something that we need to do because we do it for the jurisdiction that we work in. And it is troubling. There's no doubt about it.
I mean, when you think about the negative impact, I mean, if there are any folks within the circle with lower income,
Yep.
then this is such a hardship on them anyway. And, you know, if your car is exposed and it's vulnerable and all those things, and there's no parking on top of it, it's just not a good thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions of staff?
Well, yeah, I wanted to kind of drill in a little more on the parking issue, so I appreciate Commissioner Alexander bringing that up. Because you talked about parking early on in your presentation. Is the parking standards, do they not apply in the case of where there's the affordable housing developments, or can you just review that?
Yeah,
for me?
so this one, it strictly says the mixed income housing. So under AB 2011, you have two housing development types. You can have 100% affordable housing, and then you can do mixed income housing, which has the breakdown of how much affordable housing you need to apply. And in this law specifically under the mixed income housing, it says no parking requirement. But under the affordable housing one, which is 100%, it either falls back on AB 2097 if it meets the criteria, or the city's parking requirements in its municipal code. So it's really strange how that came to fruition.
So basically, if it would be a development potentially close, what was it say? Did it say 500 feet from a major transit stop, or
Half a mile.
half a mile? Okay, so not necessarily extremely close, but reasonably close, I guess you would say. Or in the other case, where there's no parking requirement at all under AB 2011, then that's the only, the other extra, I guess, requirement has to be the really low income component of that, right?
So the mixed income under rental, it's 8% and 5% of low and extremely low, respectively. And then if it's owner occupied, it's 30% for moderate or 15% for low income. I know, it's interesting. Why they just threw the parking standards out the door on that, I don't know why that came about.
And then one other question. There was a expiration date, right? You said, I think it was 10 years?
2033?
2033. And I thought that was kind of curious, but it sounds like that's just normal, what they do for these, like, because you mentioned the other AB 35 or whatever that's expired.
And they can always come back with legislation in 8 years trying to repeal that and saying we want to extend the sunset date. Absolutely, that can happen. I think they're going to look at probably the success of the bill after it's implemented to see how well it's working. And I think that's what legislatures do, to see if they need to extend the sunset period.
And I'm going to ask you to kind of repeat yourself one more time. Going back to your presentation, how you mentioned about how the AHOs tie into this, because we spent a lot of time going through that, and you helped us all learn that. But can you repeat yourself on how that ties in?
So what this would do under SB 6, it would allow the city to at least get affordable housing as opposed to no affordable housing, which would be equality that we're already imposing on other commercial properties in the city that have been given an affordable housing overlay zone. So at least we get some housing units towards our regional housing need allocation. If you recall, we were tagged with 2,800 units in low income, which is a very difficult product to build. So everybody should at least chip into that. You shouldn't have a developer that's now to come in under SB 6 and take a commercial property and do 100% market rate when we rezone the property next door with an affordable housing overlay zone to at least get 20% of the units to ever be constructed to participate in that requirement. So we felt that it should be equally distributed across.
So it kind of pushes them into
Yes.
that box.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, it kind of takes something that's difficult and uses it to our advantage in the only way we can.
Absolutely.
And then is that part of the First Amendment, the zoning change, or is that part of the specific plans?
It's part of both. So this language that you see here will be used in all documents. So if it's related to SB 6, it'll be subject to the requirements set forth in Chapter 1731. That's our Affordable Housing Overlay Zone chapter with our regulations. And then the other one is AB 2011. So this exact language will follow through in its entirety in the CMC and in the 15 specific plans that have been identified.
All right, thank you so much.
And I did have one other question. So those cities, we don't specifically have inclusionary zoning per se,
No.
but this is forcing us in that direction, as you stated. But what's the effect for cities that do have inclusionary zoning? I mean, they've already they're already using it as a tool to meet their RHNA numbers?
Yeah, no. So having inclusionary housing, this is a discussion we had because I thought that was going to be my scapegoat on the housing element, and I was quickly told no. Just because you have an inclusionary zoning ordinance or a housing ordinance does not mean that you all of a sudden met your RHNA criteria. You actually have to demonstrate which sites can support your RHNA numbers, not just a zoning ordinance. So even though you have that in place, you still have to go through the process of identifying the site, the square footage of the site, the likability of it being redeveloped, and saying, we think this site can get us X number of units for this income. So it's not a blanket, it's not a win-all, which you think about it, you think it is, but it's not. They still have to go through the site's identification process and demonstrate to HCD that they have sites available for the planning of those units.
And I did have one question, the city that was in the news recently that I won't name, and they, because some of what was outlined, and maybe it could have been the slant of the article, I don't know, some of what their discussion was for those sites, one in particular, kind of came into the discussion for us for some of our sites, justifications for identifying that site or this site. And so I was a little bit confused of why they were in hot water when we were kind of weighing it back and forth ourselves.
Well, are we talking about the Orange County city? Yeah, so I think there's a lot more going on there. Number one, being very vocal, so they've definitely drawn attention to themselves. I think my understanding is staff has presented an HCD compliant housing element to the council. It's just a matter of them approving it. And so it just really depends on what sites they were talking about in general. Again, we said clearly from day one, we cannot guarantee that housing will be developed on these properties, but the likelihood looks really good based on HCD's criteria.
Oh, I see.
So you definitely, you had some cities, they were rezoning City Hall, and everyone was saying, do you expect City Hall to go away and be rebuilt with housing? No, that's unrealistic. So we're not going to do that. But we're going to pick other surplus properties that we think the city may likely be able to do housing on.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll move to public comment. So we'll start with ZTA 2023-002, opening public comment. Ms. Capilla, do we have any public comment cards? Looks like
I was trying to wave at you.
it's walking down.
I was
Your
trying
name,
to.
sir?
Joe Morgan, 2063 Ren. So to clarify on the prevailing wage, I'm not a prevailing wage expert, but I have a couple friends in the trade, and one of them did a decent amount of prevailing wage work, and they were not a union shop, but purpose of the prevailing wages is sort of make it fluid between union and non-union. So I took the liberty of looking up framer hours, the current prevailing wage for a framer for residential projects. It's $36 an hour. And it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out that that's probably double. Yeah, what most of the people that are, if you were to be a non-prevailing wage shop, it's going to be probably double hourly. But the fun part comes in required benefits. That would be, so the total hourly cost that I could calculate for the prevailing wage determination for the current year from DIR is $61.67 an hour for a framer. So it's been a huge issue with LA building affordable housing. It just shoots the prices right up. It's crazy how much it increased the cost. And so they really haven't gotten much done, and it blows up the budgets. And it's one of the reasons why government never really gets into building housing, because they can't afford to do it. So then they sort of partner up with people like CNC, because CNC can get it done at regular rates. But then if all of these projects have to be done at PW, then it's a wash, kind of, whether the government's going to do it or they're going to do it. So, it's a weird sort of circular firing squad thing where we say we want to do something, and then everybody goes, yeah, me too, I want a piece of that too. And so if there's a saving grace, it's almost like this is a little bit of a poison pill for any of these getting done, because nobody's going to want to go build an apartment complex at prevailing wage, because it's going to completely blow up the budget on all of it. So, so maybe by their one-size-fits-all, Riverside's the same as San Francisco logic, maybe we'll get saved by some of their idiocy this time as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment, bring it back to the commission for any closing comments or a motion on the zone text amendment item.
Just my only thought is just the complication for staff to go through these applications that come forward. It blows my mind to think of, the flow chart's got to be crazy, depending on what comes forward. So good luck, Ms. Coletta.
My comment is, I think it's great that staff looked through where things that were required, how it could be adapted, at least partially, to meet a benefit. So for example, the AHO component, I think it demonstrates that even if something is forced upon an organization, that you can work through a process and determine how to at least adapt it to some degree to help us at some point. So thank you for that.
I'll make a motion to approve the zoning change.
And do we have a second?
A second.
I'm sorry, you said?
Yes.
Yes. Commissioner Alexander provided the second. If please vote on the zone text amendment. All right, the zone text amendment motion passes. So we'll now move to the SPA 2023-0002. We've heard the staff report. I'll go ahead, and I think everyone's questions were tied to that. So I'll go ahead and open up that item for public comment. Ms. Capilla, do we have any public comment for the SPA application?
No, Chair, we do not.
No public comment, so we'll bring it back to the commission. Any further comments from the commission or motion?
I did have one question for Ms. Coletta. So the specific plans that are highlighted in the text changes in the Exhibit 1 that you provided. So for example, on the Green River Ranch specific, it's a lot to have to take in, but if you could give an example as to, for example, the Green River Ranch specific, that includes the old horse property? Or what does that include?
Yeah, so the Green River Ranch specific plan would only be applicable to the general commercial zone and mixed-use zone for that property, which is Green River Road near the on-ramp of the 91 freeway.
So this could affect the commercial property on the north side?
Yes, on the north side, that's commercial general. We currently have a proposal in for the mixed use, which is an business park development.
I see. And the impact would be a portion of it, or all of it could be?
The commercial piece on the north side, it could be all of it. It's about a 7-acre piece on the north side of Green River.
Okay, so that would be in the neighborhood of what you were describing earlier, 3 to 5 acres for a typical developer builds. And could we just kind of go through these, and Cerro de Oro, what would that look like? Are we talking about the promenade, if there were?
Yeah, so you're talking about the neighborhood commercial districts. So that would be where the neighborhood commercial district is over there off of Green River and Palisades, or no, Paseo Grande? Palisades.
Palisades.
Where you just saw the Starbucks tonight.
Yes.
And also where the Ralph's Shopping Center is off near Ridgeline. That's also a neighborhood commercial center.
So how would that become available, for example, part of that shopping center?
It just wouldn't, I don't think it'd be part, I think if they, the center, the property owner were to ever decide to sell it or
I see what you're saying.
change it out, yeah.
Okay, so this is not going to be probably vibrant operating centers, but perhaps those who come into trying times,
Yeah,
as you said.
have high vacancy rates, can't keep tenants. You know, we have shopping centers that are partially occupied. I think it'll be a valuation of all of that.
I see. And as far as downtown revitalization specific plan, there would be a lot probably that could be, for example, the lab.
Yeah, so the downtown zone already allows residential. So if they were to, they're already allowed residential under the downtown specific plan, but if somebody wanted to come in and use this by right proposal, then they would have to comply with these pieces of legislation.
So for example, the corner of North Main and 6th,
Yep.
and it'd be the northwest corner, that lot could potentially be.
Yep.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
And as far as Mountain Gate specific plan, we're talking about the Albertsons
Yes, so that's on Main and Foothill.
and not that open lot west of that.
That is also commercial.
All right, let me keep going. Just a second, please. Where's Corona Vista specific plan?
That is in South Corona near California and Ontario, where you have Santiago High School, the Dunkin' Donuts site with the Smart and Final,
Yes.
the Home Depot.
Okay, got it. And then, so how in the world would Arantine Hills specific plan be affected? Let's say one of the 5 phases that's currently being looked at, and one of them wanted to have even higher density?
No, so it would only be applicable to the commercial zone where
Commercial
you currently have Bedford
Bedford
Marketplace.
Marketplace.
That would only be applicable to that property. And just because this red line version is telling you we are putting it in there, it doesn't mean it'll actually happen. We are just doing it. We never know what is going to happen, so we want to have it in there to be consistent. We don't want to come back and say, well, we didn't put that as part of the amendment.
So as far as the Dos Lagos specific plan, is that the hotel and the,
It's entertainment, commercial, and business park, where you have the 6-story office building too. That's business park.
the one that's unoccupied?
That covers that property, and it covers all of Dos Lagos, commercial properties.
So do I understand then, are you saying that part of the Dos Lagos complex is a separate parcel? And so that, so it would be.
There's multiple parcels. All the restaurants are on their own pads, the shops are on their own pads, yes.
But it's, I mean, as far as the 20 acre,
Yep.
so each one of those were approved separately?
No, they were approved as a comprehensive center, but they were subdivided into smaller pads for some of them. So the parking lot, I believe it's on its own lot.
And what about the Cimarron specific plan?
That is
It says 95.
Hidden Valley and I-15. That's where the Kohl's and the Stater Brothers is.
Okay, and Chick-fil-A?
Yes.
On that side?
Yep.
Okay. And the Corona Ranch, we've already talked about that. All right.
That's near McKinley.
Oh,
Corona Ranch and Northeast Corona are both each side of McKinley, north of the 91.
okay. And then northeast is
The other side of McKinley.
the other side. And the Magnolia, is that where the,
El Camino, where you have Lowe's and all the office buildings.
I'm impressed, Ms. Coletta. that
I know,
you-
I'm like, you're
Very
really
impressed.
trying me on my locations.
this is a history in Ms. Coletta's.
Directory 411.
Wow.
So
Your hands-on on
you
every
just
one of them.
mentioned there the Lowe's and that, so that, again, that complex is multiple,
Parcels, yes. So it's the way the developer does the financing, and if they ever sell off the parcels to a company, but they're all part of the same association.
and the crossings, what about them?
They have multiple parcels as well, yes.
So if they decide that, one of their empty buildings is no longer tenable, and if it's on a separate parcel,
Yes.
they can qualify to use this.
Yes, and that's why we included them all in those specific plans. We did not want to miss anyone and then all of a sudden realize we didn't catch something.
Of course, but as Mr. Morgan pointed out, the prevailing wage probably makes it not super attractive.
Any further comments?
I'll make a motion to adopt the specific plan amendment.
I'll second.
And we have a second by Commissioner Sherman. If we please vote on the item. And that motion passes. Moving to written communications, has the Planning and Housing Commission Secretary received any written communications from persons providing information or seeking action by the Planning and Housing Commission?
Chair, no, we have not.
Ms. Coletta, any administrative reports for us tonight? And any comments? No? Any others than you've already done? Any comments from fellow commissioners or reports?
I just wanted to thank Ms. Coletta and pass on to your staff how they stayed on top of 6 and Paseo Grande. They cleaned that out again, and it looks as good as it can under the conditions. Thank you.
And then I guess I would make bring up a possible future agenda item. I know the chair and I briefly talked about his extended service in the chair. And I don't know if that's something we want to possibly transition.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I know inquired about the open position. I don't know if we have any further update on that. I haven't heard that that's been filled. And I'd like to, at a date that we have full attendance, even if it's just the 4 of us, that's usually our first item that we have on the agenda is those elections. So if we can land on a specific date that we're all, Mr. Whitty, it's not that it's because of you on Zoom, but we do have to have full of attendance in order to do that, so.
So would you like us just to have it ready on the next agenda? And
Yeah, do you want to confirm schedule before you commit?
Yeah,
on
I
that?
will be here in person at the next meeting from the start.
And it'll have to be June.
I'm sorry?
It'll have to be June.
Oh,
Because
that's
you're not at the next one. Okay.
Well, I could, if there's a problem, I could Zoom in, but I wouldn't be able to do a vote on it.
Yeah, okay, so then we'll wait for the next confirmed meeting that at least the 4 of us are all in attendance. All right, thank you with that. We'll adjourn. Our next meeting is May 22nd. Thank you. Good evening.